They say a rough day now is nothing compared to the days behind us. But what if those rough days, the frostbitten dawns, the endless toil, the hunger so deep it carved itself into bone, what if they hold more secrets than we've ever imagined? Step out of your warm home for a moment. Picture a landscape of crooked timber cottages, their thatched roofs alive with rats and the whispers of wind. Mud underfoot, the stench of smoke and dung, the hush of prayers drifting through the air like the faint toll of a faraway bell. For the medieval peasant, life was a tightrope walk between survival and surrender. Yet beneath the layers of filth and hardship, the story grows stranger the deeper we dig. We tend to think of these people as simple, bound by soil, by harvest, by the lash of their lords and the unyielding mercy of the church. But the truth is more complicated. They were engineers of survival, cunning in ways we've barely begun to understand. In the shadows of the manorial court and the cryptic pages of half-burnt parish records, we find glimpses of a rural intelligence, a peasant code that balanced faith and forbidden knowledge. Their world was governed by the seasons, yes, but also by unspoken arrangements. A farmer who lost his ox could count on his neighbors. A widow with no seed grain might find her doorstep dusted with kernels before dawn. Mutual aid, an unrecorded economy as old as any king's charter, sustained them through failed harvests, brutal winters, and the whims of noblemen who claimed the very fish swimming in the streams. Yet for every rule, there was a loophole. For every tithe paid to the church, a hidden ritual in the forest, where herbs were buried under moonlight to protect the fields. When the priest preached fire and damnation, the peasants nodded, but in the folds of their tunics, they carried charms of bone and rush. Archaeologists still unearth these talismans, a tiny amulet shaped like a cross, yet inscribed with markings no churchman would bless. And what of the days when death rode on the wind, when the Black Death arrived like a whispered rumor, spreading quicker than any priest's absolution? We know the masks, the beaked, bird-like horrors stuffed with rosemary and camp, but do we know how peasants truly faced that invisible enemy? Some towns banished cats, condemning themselves to the rats. Others gathered in torchlit vigils, chanting psalms while the plague cart creaked by. And when medicine failed, they turned to the margins of their faith, the wise women, the healers, the unlicensed keepers of old, half-pagan remedies. In the shards of old bones, we see a stubborn will to live. Skeletons with trepan skulls, holes bored by crude drills, yet the bone around them shows signs of healing. These people survived brain surgery with nothing more than ale and a leather strap to bite down on, and we marvel at their ignorance. Perhaps they knew something we've forgotten, that fear is a scalpel that cuts deeper than any iron blade. Underneath it all, there thrums a question: why do the official histories reduce these lives to mere drudgery? Why erase the hidden intelligence of the peasant mind? Because in the fields and middens and timber-framed huts, the unlettered poor were storing up more than grain. They were preserving lost methods, forgotten seeds, techniques of rotation and soil renewal that modern science only caught up with centuries later. In the smell of wet rushes spread on a dirt floor, in the flicker of a rushlight guttering against wattle and daub, we glimpse a world where survival was an art we may need again when the structures we lean on start to crumble. In the long silence of the night, you might hear them, those unremembered peasants, calling out through half-rotted parish scrolls, reminding us that resilience is an inheritance that can't be taxed or tied away. A legacy written not in ink, but in the marrow of those who never stopped working, never stopped hoping. They woke before the sun, when the mist still clung to the earth like a veil, a thin, chill blanket that made their breath visible as they pushed through frost-hardened fields. The rhythm of a peasant's day was not just toil, but an endless negotiation with nature's moods and the human appetite for power. And yet, the further you wander into these chronicles, the more you sense they were never truly powerless. We see them bent over the plow, leather straps digging into calloused shoulders. We think we know this picture, but look closer. The heavy wooden plow wasn't just primitive, it was ingenious, balanced just so, to cut the thickest clay. 2 oxen for lighter soils, 8 for the heaviest. Lose an ox, and you lost your year. But that was never the end. Some villages had codes, mutual contracts, unwritten, but binding, so that a farmer who lost his ox would find another tied to his post come dawn. No questions asked. They grew wheat, barley, rye, but they also sowed hidden seeds. Layers of knowledge passed through whispers, father to son, mother to daughter, elder to child. Crop rotation. Leave a field fallow so the soil may breathe again. No scientist or scholar taught them that. They watched the land, read its silences, and obeyed what it told them in the rustle of stalks and the tilt of the sun. By midsummer, fields shimmered with gold, but the promise of harvest came with fear. One patch of weeds, left to spread, could ruin a season's hope. So entire families bent low, hour after hour, rooting out every invader by hand. There were no clever poisons, no factory-made pesticides, just fingers cracked and bleeding. Children shooing crows from dawn till dusk. These same children, who we think of as voiceless, left behind tiny artifacts, clay whistles, carved dolls tucked into the rafters of ancient cottages. Charms to ward off evil spirits that might twist a healthy crop into rot overnight. When the scythe swung through wheat and barley in late summer, it cut more than grain. It sliced open the deepest fears. Storms could come early. Mold could take hold. The church might demand its 10th sheaf before a family's own stores were full. So they labored as one, blades flashing in the sun like a ritual. A skilled reaper could cut an acre a day, 15,000 swings of the arm. The same motion repeated until shoulder and elbow locked stiff. Archaeologists have run their hands along the skeletons of these people and found the grooves of arthritis already etched deep before they turned 30. Yet this endless wear did not crush them. In winter's iron grip, when the field slept under frost, their ingenuity flourished. Inside those wattle and daub walls patched with mud and manure, walls that listened and remembered, they spun wool by candlelight, patched tools, mended boots. Threshing grain was a brutal chore, pounding and separating kernels in barns so cold your breath turned to crystals on the beams. But this was the secret season too, the quiet months when stories bloomed. Picture a single room lit by a rush dipped in tallow, a circle of bodies cloaked in rough wool, children half buried in straw beds, while an elder weaves tales that dance between fact and dream. These weren't just bedtime fancies, they were oral archives, carrying scraps of old wisdom, how to ward off the blight. How to bury a charm at the foot of an apple tree so its branches would bear fruit, even in lean years. Some of these tales told of beasts and saints, others hinted at darker things, secrets of the land that the church forbade, but the people remembered all the same. Despite what the scribes wrote, the peasant mind was never empty. Their archives were not parchment but memory, not cathedral vaults but the hidden corners of the mind. Even their food was an act of resistance. 2 to 3 pounds of bread a day, black bread, dense and sour, ground on millstones that left specks of grit, embedded in every mouthful. Their teeth wore down like river stones, but they did not starve. They knew how to turn cabbage into sour preserves that outlasted snowdrifts. Beans, peas, salted fish hauled inland on carts from the coast. They bent nature to their will, just enough to last a year. When famine came as it did, a wolf at the door. Once every generation, they found ways to endure the unendurable. Chronicles record families boiling bark, scraping lichen from stones, gnawing at the leather of old shoes. And still, in the bleakest times, the bonds that tied them together grew tighter. Neighbors watched for each other's children. Villages that practiced these unspoken networks survived while others vanished from the maps. There is an unsettling truth here, one that flickers like candlelight behind the official story. Beneath the weight of lord and priest, beneath the endless dues and the threat of the stocks, these people nurtured a stubborn sovereignty. You see it in the communal ovens built by the entire village, the shared grazing greens, the barns raised by many hands. In these small spaces of solidarity, the old idea flickers that power can come not from the top down, but from the soil up. This resilience, this fierce memory, did not fit neatly into the chronicles penned by monks or the dusty decrees of kings. So they buried it. They called these people ignorant, filthy, backward, as if the centuries of survival were just accident. But the evidence lies waiting in the ruins. Charred timbers, forgotten tools, the pollen grains embedded in the floors of cottages long swallowed by bramble. If you stand in those ruined fields at dusk, you might feel it the echo of hands that knew how to coax life from frozen ground, how to bend nature's silence into abundance. And somewhere in that echo, the question grows louder. If they could endure so much with so little, what hidden strength might we yet recover when our own fragile certainties begin to crack? This is not just history, it is a map, a warning, and a clue to how ordinary people history tried to erase once turned survival into an act of quiet defiance. And if we listen, perhaps their whispers still have something to teach us. Long after the last embers died in the hearth, the secrets did not sleep. They drifted behind walls of thatch and oak, hidden in the hush between night prayers and dawn chores. Listen close enough, and you might hear what the scribes did not dare record, that beneath the sway of cathedral bells and lordly decrees, the peasant mind wandered into realms the church could never fully claim. Archaeologists have unearthed strange objects. Buried in thresholds and hearths, tiny votive figurines carved from bone, scraps of parchment tucked into clay pots, shards of glass etched with symbols that do not appear in any monastic archive. These were offerings, wards, coded bargains with forces older than the bishop's crozier, and yet they survived, layered beneath centuries of conquest, plagues, and the relentless grind of tithes and tax. Consider the healers, the so-called wise women who walked the hedgerows at dusk, gathering yarrow and mugwort, whispering charms over bruised flesh and festering wounds. Officially, they were tolerated until their cures outperformed the priest's prayers, or their knowledge touched a boundary the church could not explain. Then they became witches. Yet their ledgers survived not in gilded manuscripts, but scratched onto wood, pressed into beeswax tablets, scrawled on the margins of household accounts. A recipe for honey salve here, a charm to ease childbirth there, tiny acts of defiance wrapped in the ordinary business of living. A fragment of bone found in a peasant grave bears a crude inscription, a snake coiled around a staff. Older than the caduceus of physicians, older perhaps than the scribes dared to admit. Did this peasant family believe in the serpent's wisdom, passed down through generations in whispers that the saints could never quite silence? Or was it simply a mark of hope, scratched by a trembling hand as the Black Death stalked the village lanes? No one can say for certain, but we know they clung to what worked. What the soil and bone and blood told them was true. Sometimes the hidden knowledge wore the mask of faith. Take the ancient rite of burying a piece of iron at a field's edge to protect it from blight. The priest would bless the seeds in spring, but the farmer would hammer a rusted blade into the earth just the same. Not instead of, but alongside. As though they knew that power is never singular, that what lies beneath the church's stone altars might not always be Christ's bones, but older bones, older gods, wrapped in Christian cloths so the conquerors could sleep easy. In rare manuscripts, those few that escaped the inquisitors' flame, there are hints of peasant revolts not just against lords, but against a reality too tight to breathe in. One letter from 1381, smuggled out of a rebel camp, speaks of a charter older than kings, a promise that land and bread belonged to those who worked them, not those who taxed them. We see echoes of this belief in the careful layouts of some abandoned villages, where the fields were divided in ways that defy feudal logic. Round fields, star-shaped commons, as though geometry itself were an act of quiet rebellion, a hidden map pointing to a different world. These scraps might seem small, but when woven together they reveal a pattern the chroniclers never intended us to find. A world within the world, where peasants were not just prey for plague and famine, but keepers of a deeper inheritance. An inheritance built not on parchment but on spoken memory, not in castles, but in cottages that smelled of damp earth and burning rushes. When the church thundered about sin and salvation, peasants turned their eyes to the stars. In hedgerow calendars and lunar wheels scratched onto barn beams, they recorded the turning of the heavens. Secret alignments that marked when to sow, when to reap, when to keep the door barred against unseen spirits. In these celestial notations, some historians glimpsed the ghosts of older cosmologies. Older clocks that ticked not to the toll of bells but to the pulse of constellations drifting overhead, like a forgotten scripture. And then there are the bones, dug from graveyards abandoned for centuries. They speak in ways ink never could. Skeletons showing healed fractures. Evidence of surgeries so precise they match modern techniques, yet nowhere do we find the books that taught them. Honey smeared in wounds long before germ theory. Moldy bread pressed to infected cuts, 1,000 years before penicillin. Knowledge that rose from careful hands and unrecorded tests, passed mouth to mouth, mother to daughter, uncle to nephew, a library burned by time, but not entirely lost, in this twilight realm of survival and quiet heresy. The line between faith and folklore blurs until it is meaningless. Crosses buried with horse skulls to bless a foundation. Saints invoked alongside spirits older than scripture. The priest's Latin chants mingling with hedge magic incantations in the same breath. A peasant did not care where the blessing came from, so long as the wheat rose tall, and the plague passed by his door. And so they endured, despite the grinding yoke of tithe and tax. Despite the plagues that could wipe out entire villages overnight. Despite the church courts that flayed them. For pennies and sins, both real and imagined, they carved out pockets of freedom wherever they could. In secret rites at the edge of the forest, in hidden songs sung when the overseer's back was turned, in the stubborn wisdom that a field must rest to bloom again, just as the spirit must slip away from the watchful eye of power to remain truly alive. Perhaps that is their greatest legacy, not the tools they forged, nor the barns they raised, nor the narrow furrows etched into the English and European countryside that still survive on satellite maps. It is the truth that beneath every system that calls itself eternal, ordinary people have always sown seeds of another reality. A reality where a village could govern itself if it dared. Where a healer's garden was more trusted than a bishop's blessing. Where survival itself became a subversive act. A quiet refusal to bow entirely to the chains of the known world. So the next time you pass the crumbling wall of a medieval church or stand in a field that once fed 1,000 souls, remember, what we call the past was never simple. It was layered, like soil built up over centuries, each generation burying a secret for the next to find. And under our feet, those secrets still wait. If you listen closely to the wind that rattles through ancient hedgerows, you might hear them yet, whispers of a world that refused to die, no matter how many chronicles tried to kill it. Some truths lie beneath stone and bone. Some slip through the cracks of official history. And some survive because they have always belonged to those who listen for the hidden heartbeat that keeps the world alive. And that heartbeat, it's still here, waiting for us to remember. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next one.